Okay, welcome to designing characters and concepts using silhouette technique. For this tutorial, we're going to run through just basic setup in Photoshop using the Wacom tablet and coming up with some rapid prototype using the silhouette technique. So let's get started straight away with Photoshop and open up a new document. So I'm just going to go to File, New, and I'm going to just create this as a international paper and select A4. It's a nice size for us to work with. Obviously in Photoshop we do have a bunch of different presets we can go through, including web, film, art and illustration, and these are all going to be relative to specific formats. So for example, film, we can go HDTV 1080p, and it'll have the dimensions set up already with resolution, etc. But for this, international paper should be good. We'll notice resolution is about 300 pixels per inch, as opposed to film and TV, where most of the stuff is going to be 72 pixels per inch. So it's much more suited to anything that we might print or create a poster for. So anyway, back to international paper. A4 works well. As far as concepting goes, you probably want to turn this into a landscape mode. Depending on which version you're running with, you may have that option on the side as you're creating this. So I'm just going to hit OK. And at the moment, I have this set up in portrait mode. So I do want to sort of work this with landscape. It does sort of make it easier to work on a standard format monitor. So to do this, I'm just going to go image rotation, and just flip that 90 degrees clockwise. And there we have it. Okay, before we get started, just a little bit of house cleaning. Obviously we've got our tool panel along the left here, and we have a bunch of presets here. So if I go to Window, Workspace, we can see that Essentials is ticked on. It's going to have a lot of these things here. If it doesn't, you can always hit Reset Essentials, and that will bring it back to the normal setup. But for this part here, we don't really want all this clutter here. We want to be able to move around. About the only thing we do need at the moment is the Layers panel. So I'm going to grab that and just tear that off to the side. And the other panels I'm going to tear off and just turn them off simply there. And replace my layers panel and draw that down. So we are going to be working with layers. This is going to be one of the major elements that we're going to play with. So each new character, we're typically going to be running on a particular layer. Okay, another thing with working on a new document, especially with using the silhouette technique, we do not want to start drawing on the background layer. So background is just going to be a white layer typically. It's typically going to be locked. We can go ahead and start drawing on this, but that's really not what we want to do. It's going to cause us more problems later on. So first things first, let's create a new layer. So we can go to this little icon down here, and that's going to create a new layer. We can double tap on that and rename that if necessary. You can also right click and add a little color marker, which is going to show up on our layers panel, which is going to help us identify our layer a little bit easier. So I can name this image 1, for example. We haven't really got anything too specific, but let's get to that. So again, we don't want to draw on the background. We want to create an empty layer to draw on. You can see if I turn this background visibility off, we can see this checkered marker situation, and that's essentially saying this is at the moment a invisible layer. Okay, now I want to be able to move my screen around by holding down the space bar, and at the moment it's not really moving around, so I'm going to actually turn this into a full screen mode right down the bottom of our tool panel here. And I'm going to go full screen with menu bar just by clicking on that, and that's going to allow me to actually use my space bar to bring up this hand, and we can move the screen around. And of course, Control plus or minus is going to allow us to zoom in and out. So let's bring that background back again. Okay, down the bottom here we have our basic color, primary and second color picker. I'm going to click on this one, and I'm just going to go for a pure, straight down to pure black, and hit OK for that. Doing silhouettes, we are going to be focusing on just doing pure black for drawing, and this is going to be just fine for us at the moment. I'm going to select my brush tool. So shortcut for this is B, and just remember by hitting Shift and B, we can actually cycle through the different types of brushes here. So pencil, color replacement, mixer brush. But at this moment, our standard brush tool is just going to be fine for what we're going to be doing. Okay, so we go to the top here, and we have a whole drop down full of brushes to choose from. And also, if we go to this little cog mechanism here, we can see there are a whole lot of brushes as well that we can load up. So, for example, I could go natural brushes, and it will ask me if I want to append or cancel or OK. Append is going to allow me to add on to my existing list of brushes, whereas OK is going to replace them. So I've hit OK, and there we go. We're back to some. We've got rid of existing brushes, and we're back to some various other ones. I'm going to go to Reset Brushes and hit Append, and Append's going to drop in our original brushes and keep the new ones there. So let's go to Reset Brushes and hit OK, and I'm going to hit Don't Save. And this is going to bring me back to my basics, which is going to work fine for silhouettes. So let's have a quick look at some of the brushes here. If you are using a Wacom tablet, we do have a few things we need to take into consideration, and that is with our brushes and what they're capable of doing. So if I pick one like this one here, which has a sort of a soft round brush, and I start drawing. Now we can use our square brackets. There's the square brackets which look like this on our keyboard. Next to the letter P, and the left one is going to do a minus, and the right one is going to do a plus on our brush size. So as I'm pressing the square bracket on the keyboard, you can see my brush shape getting larger, and the opposite one, we can make that get smaller. So it's a nice little shortcut to know. There are a few other ways of doing this. We can actually bring up our brush size here and adjust, but this way we get to see our actual marker on the go using that. If for whatever reason you find that your brush isn't showing up as far as the round shape here, it could be because you have your caps lock on. If you have your caps lock on, you're just going to get this target symbol. So just hit the caps lock again, and that will bring you back. So it does happen quite often, and with some of the other tools as well. So let's have a quick look at this round brush here, and just sort of run over the screen a few times if need be. Your Wacom will typically have a default which allows the pressure to affect certain things. So the harder you press, as I'm doing now, the darker the line may very well be. Now this is just a preset that some of the brushes have, and we can change this around. So if we look at this top bar here, we can see that there is a button here which will make sure the pressure is for opacity when it's clicked, and there's a few others here as well. This one is for airbrush style for build-up effects, and this one is always use pressure for size. So if I click on that one here, we can see that by adjusting the pressure on my brush, we can get varying sizes. The harder I press, the larger the brush. The lighter I press, the smaller the brush. So a few variances there. Now for doing silhouettes, I'm actually going to just delete everything on this layer. I could delete the layer and create a new one, but in this case I'm going to delete everything. I'm going to use this rectangular selection tool and just drag it over the area and simply hit delete, and it's going to delete that. I'm going to hit Control D to deselect, get rid of those marching ants, and we can start again. So grabbing my brush again, shortcut B, I'm going to select onto my brush picker here, and I'm going to go for a round solid brush. So as opposed to the lighter brush here, this one, a nice solid round brush here. And as I draw, I can start seeing that I'm going to get some variations depending on the pressure. The higher I press, the wider the brush. Now, to fix out some of the details in this, I'm actually going to go back to my toolbox. So this is this little panel up the top here. Let's click on that. It's going to bring up our brush preferences. Now we can build our own brushes with this, but I'm going to look at some of the presets in this. Very first one is brush tip shape. There is no checkbox in this, so I'm just going to click on it anyway, and I'm going to make sure my spacing right at the bottom here is set to the lowest it can be, which is 1%. The larger we have it spaced, the more we're going to have the actual mark being spread across. So if I was to draw with this, you can see it looks like a weird cartoon caterpillar. Not really what we're after, so I'm going to drop that down to 1%, and we're going to get a nice smooth line with that. Next thing I'm going to look is at shape dynamics. Now this is already ticked on by default for this particular brush. Size jitter, which is going to affect the jitter of size on there, is set to pen pressure. That's exactly what I want for this particular exercise, which is fantastic. I'm going to have a look quick down. A lot of these are turned off, and I do encourage you to check out some variations on this, have a play around. But transfer, I'm going to click onto that, and it's currently ticked off at the moment for the opacity, which is perfect. I'm just going to make sure that that's turned off. If that's got pen pressure on it, it means that the pen is actually going to affect the opacity, and you can see it's sort of doing some weird stuff with that. So I'm actually going to turn that off and untick that as well. So I can now turn that off, and I can see that my brush strokes are purely going to be affected by the pressure. So once again, I'm going to delete these test lines, marquee tool, and select the area, drag it over the area, and hit delete to get rid of that. Control D to unselect everything, or deselect. That's also up here in select, Control D, and Shift Control D to reselect. So great. Let's just clear up my workspace again. Quite often, if you activate certain things, certain toolbars will pop up with that. So I've still got my blank layer. I'm going to go brush tool, and I'm just simply going to start throwing some lines around. Now, black line, variable adjustment on my pen pressure, so as far as the width of the pen, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to actually adjust this using my square brackets. I'm going to use this quite often, but typically you want to start with some just nice marks, and this is just sort of a mark making exercise for now, and we're just going to sort of try and drag out some shapes and see what happens with it. So I really do encourage you to sort of start with the larger shapes and just move this about and see what you can sort of figure out from the image, and see if anything starts popping out from this. And every now and again you may just see an image of form. You may have a preset image that you want to start working with, but sometimes it's just good to sort of move this about. And ordinarily we want to keep this pretty quick. If it's not working out, it's very, very easy to sort of jump in and start looking at a different set of shapes. It's very, this is designed to be very rapidly done. If this is working or it's not working, the cool thing that we can do is we can start transforming this around. This one's already sort of taking a shape, but Control T for transform, and we can grab the edges of this. So using Control T, and we can start moving our image around. Now remember, holding down Shift is going to lock in our parameters if we don't want it to sort of distort the image, and we can rotate and see if we can't find another image that might be more suited to what we want. I'm kind of happy with the way it is at the moment, so I'm just going to leave it, maybe just a slight turn on that, and either hit enter or hit the tick mark here, or if you want to cancel that, you can just hit the cross there, and I can say great, there's my image. So if it is getting too large, if you're sort of moving it off the page, you can transform that down. I'll go back to my brush, and I'm just going to start dropping in some more lines and see if I can't just get some inkling of a character. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on developing any one particular character at the moment. I do want to get a varying range of characters that I can sort of go maybe take a few for a walk a bit later on, so to speak. I can look at that and go, okay, that's pretty good. But another technique we might want to start looking at is actually eating away at this, sort of sculpting back into it, so to speak. And we're going to use this by using the eraser tool. So we don't really want to paint into this with white because we need to remember that this actually is on a transparent layer. So later on when we come to masking this, that could be an issue. So we're going to erase into this if we do need to cut away. So I'm going to hit E for erase. That's also on our toolbar here. And similar to our brush tool, I'm going to set that up with a similar sort of brush. So I'm going to get a round solid brush. I'm going to go to my tool panel. I'm going to make sure my brush tip is spaced to very low % 1. My shape dynamics is set to pen pressure, just like the brush, and transfer is turned off. And close that down now, and I can use this to start cutting into my image. Now it's important to remember that if you do want to get some nice straight lines, remember Shift key is your friend. If you hold down Shift and move the brush across, it's going to do some nice horizontal and vertical lines. If you start in a place, then hold down Shift and then move to the next place, we're going to get some variations with that. Now because pen pressure is on, we will get a sort of a varied line if using this technique. But nevertheless, have a play around with that. You can adjust that in the tool panel by turning shape dynamics off, which means you're not going to get any varying in the sizes. But start playing around with the silhouette. Now, silhouettes are fantastic for concepting because it allows you to quickly and rapidly get a very quick idea of what a silhouette will look like without having to focus in on color, textures, and shading and stuff like that. So it's a very quick way to look at something and go, okay, great, I understand what my character or my vehicle or my environment's going to look like very, very quickly, and see how easily recognizable it's going to be. Okay, so I'm just going to leave this one for now, and I'm going to put him away in the corner. So there's a couple of ways of doing this, and I'm going to quickly show you how to do this the right way and potentially the wrong way. But again, this is just early prototype. I'm going to mention this anyway. So I'm going to go Control T for transform. I'm going to hold down Shift and shrink that character down and put them in the corner there. So I'm going to start building up a library of references for this. Once I've put them in place, I'm going to hit the tick key, and I can then create a new layer, or go Layer, New Layer. But this little icon down the bottom here will create a new layer as well. And I might want to start, press B for brush and starting out my new character. Now before I do that, I'm just going to step back a little bit. Alt Control Z to keep stepping back. And I'm just going to show you a slight issue that we might have with reducing size. So Photoshop is bitmap based, which means it's pixel based. So I'm going to show you a little thing that can happen when we do reduce the size of an image. So I'm going to hit Control T, and I'm going to shrink that character down very, very small. I'm going to hit Enter, and now I'm going to increase them back to size. So I'm going to hit Control T again, increase back to size, and you can actually start seeing the issue that we run into. This has become pixelated, and basically the reason why we've done that is once we've transformed it and hit enter, it loses its memory of what it used to be. It sort of simplifies it down. If I hit enter, this is actually going to become sort of a blurry version of it, and still really not what I'm after. So I'm going to step back, get it back to my original. If you are going to be transforming an object back and forwards in size, what we need to do is we need to right click onto our shape here. You do have a right click on your pen on the side buttons there, and I'm going to go to convert to smart object. We'll notice there's a little folded page icon in the image page here, and what smart icons objects allow us to do is transform our object if required, and hit enter, and then I'm going to transform him back, and as you can see, it's maintained its original resolution. Smart objects do a whole lot of other things, but if you're doing a lot of transforming and you know you're going to require your image to come back with its full detail, smart objects are very, very important for that kind of thing. If there are some restrictions on what you can do artistically with these, but if at any point you do need to bring this back to a normal object, right click and then rasterize layer will bring you back. Alright, so anyway, I'm going to transform this character. And shrink down, holding down shift again to keep my parameters good. Let's put him in there. Let's make him a little bit bigger. And hit enter. New layer, fantastic. And I'm just going to throw together a few more just random shapes and see what happens. Anyway, I'm going to pause that for now, and I'm just going to come up with a few